we have two very distinguished participants, Linda Avey and Denis Noble, and they will tell you about from their own perspective, but just to say some of the achievements, Denis Noble was the first who modeled a human organ, namely the human heart, and at the time when they did this, this was really revolutionary because this was a time when mathematics and biology were as far apart as the sun and the moon. And actually, this work really resulted in not only fundamental scientific insights, but also in very practical output. So, for instance, results from that project have been used to approve new drugs by the FDA. So there's very practical examples from something what started very theoretical. And Linda Avey, who is a pioneer in terms of using genetics and genetics information in a commercial context. And our moderator is somebody whom I don't need to introduce, very much in Ireland, Aine Lawlor from RT. So I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much. We don't have a fire. We do have the lovely Harry Clark windows, which are gorgeous. The last time I was in this building, and the first time I was in this building, and in a way I feel like a total fraud sitting beside two such illustrious scientists, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a journalist, but I was here 2 years ago. I was a patient representative then. You were introducing, the minister was here, Minister Clegg from Britain, and our own Minister Bruton. And I was the patient representative because the medical trial I was on for one of the new generation cancer medicines was in fact made here in Ireland, and it was a British-owned company and so on. And it was my first glimpse, actually, and the first time I began to understand that unlike it wasn't just a question of turning up at the hospital and getting this medicine, but that this medicine was new medicine, a new kind of medicine, part of a new era of medicine. And that, in fact, a lot of the research and a lot of the work was going on here in Ireland, and a lot of the new developments and a lot of the new drugs are being made here. So it's really nice, in a way, to be back here talking today for the inauguration of Systems Biology Ireland. And I feel like I've come in a bit of a circle. But anyhow, it is a brave new world. To many patients like me. And Denis, particularly because you were one of the, I suppose, the first pioneers into this sphere to look at where we are now at the start of the 21st century. You talk about learning the rhythm of the human heart. What have you learned of its rhythm? And what more do you think there is to learn on this journey?
First thing is to say that, as emphasized earlier on in the introduction, you have to understand the networks of interactions. You cannot understand something that is a process of interconnected loops and feedbacks with simply looking at a single protein, a single gene. You've got to understand the interactions. It's from understanding those interactions that we'll be able to calculate how that rhythm is generated. And from that, we've been able to advise people on how to develop new drugs. There are 2 new medications out there now approved by the FDA that come directly from the kind of work that we do. So the approach is already getting there. But you know, the interesting thing is, for me, it's taken decades to get there. It takes a long time to go from fundamental research to getting good new medications. But we are getting there.
And there's so much excitement, Linda, when people talk about, you know, the new genetic era that we're in, you know, systems biology, its application in the 21st century. But is there nearly too much excitement? You know, as Denis says, you know, translating a lot of these fantastic new discoveries about the interactions in our bodies and what exactly is happening, translating that and the issues around translating that into real medicine that really makes a difference in people's bodies. That's not a simple thing, and that's the area, of course, that you work directly in.
Right, yes, there are huge challenges, but we see them as opportunities. And this whole idea of networks and systems biology, I think you can look at that more broadly in the human population. And what's been missing, I think, is the voice of the patient. We haven't really been taking that into account, but that is really a big part of the equation of learning more about diseases. And if we don't have the patient's voice in that, we're missing so much rich information, that if we have a way of capturing that. And so when I look at the internet that's in social media and our ability to talk to each other and to bring our information together in meaningful ways, it's really going to change the whole equation and I think get us there sooner. And we've really been missing that piece, I think, up until now. And things like 23andMe are opening up this conversation, and it's going to be a bumpy road. We're not,
Talk to me about 23andMe then.
So the reason the idea for 23andMe first came was because I saw this missing component. And in fact, there was an article that was in the Wall Street Journal many years ago by, it was about a patient who had been diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. And so he was a wealthy man. He started a foundation, much like Michael J. Fox and other people. Yeah. He funded research, genetic study in the disease. He raised all this money. He did all this work. And at the end of the project, he went to the scientists and said, it'd be kind of cool if I could have my own data. And they were horrified. They just said, well, we can't give you your data. That's not, we just don't do that. And to me, that seemed crazy. Why can't a person have access to their own data? Yeah, of course, we're not going to understand all of it, but that was really where this idea clicked in. And then also understanding the complexities of disease, that we might put a label on a disease and then we just do a study assuming that we understand everything under the label of something like MS or rheumatoid arthritis, whereas we all know that these are multifactorial diseases. There's probably subtypes that we've never really distinguished. So by bringing patients into the conversation, we might start to learn more about that granularity and be able to bring this into the equation and hopefully, figure out what these subtypes are and find the genetic underpinnings for some of them, but then also start to look at the environment and collect that information as well. So we're just starting on it, even though it's been around for 7 years, but I think 23andMe in some ways is still just getting started.
All right. And Denis, what do you think is the potential, this buzzword, personalised medicine that everybody talks about? What's its potential for you?
I think it will reach its potential, which I think is vast, provided it is not simply focused on knowing your genome, not just on knowing your sequence. That in itself is important, but it's like saying, I will understand Shakespeare by understanding the letters of the English alphabet, and of course you don't. What you need to know is, what does it mean? And the meaning, of course, is in the whole organism. So it's going to be important to integrate together information from all the different levels, the genome level, the protein level, the cell, tissue, organ, up to the system, even the environment. Because in the end, you said earlier on that sometimes the patient knows more than the doctor. I think that's absolutely true. They will certainly know more about their environment, the culture they live in, the problems they have from the point of view of diet and so on. And it then has to be more of a dialogue between a doctor and a patient to explore that data and begin to understand it and work out what's the best strategy for you medically.
In a way, though, that's all very... I can see scientists standing around in a laboratory talking about this, and I can see patients kind of going, wow, that would be amazing. I can also see how in the real world there could be all kinds of problems with people getting information that they don't want. Exactly. I can see all kinds of headlines in all kinds of newspapers that could result, in scandals that could arise. Who knows what? Once you have data, how do you keep it under wraps? Who knows what about which data, the implications of all of that. We are not just single individuals, we have families, we have networks, the implications out of all of that. This is not easy stuff. On one level, it's scientifically and medically, potentially fantastic, and on another, hugely problematic. I'd like to hear each of you on that, actually.
Shall I start?
Yes, please, yeah.
Yes. First of all, I don't think you can't keep information boxed up. There's some rather dramatic examples of that recently, which I don't think we'll go into. It will leak out. We have to find ways of dealing with that, and I agree with you, there are some big ethical problems that are to do with that. What you do about an insurance company, knowing that I'm a bad insurance from... No, I'm not actually, but anyway. So there are big problems, but then society always has to deal with major problems that arise because of the development of technology. The best way of approaching this is to say, recognize what the problems are, then work out how you regulate get those. And it'll be regulators that'll have to think about how you deal with that. At least that's my view. But it could be that Linda has a different view. I don't know.
No, I agree. And one of the analogies I always use is when cars first came out, they didn't have seatbelts, they didn't have airbags, they didn't have all these protective features that we learned that we needed as we went along. And I think as a society, we have to figure out what those bumpers are that we need to put on information. And we learn as a society, and if we're trying to put things in a box and prevent people from having information, I think that's worse, because then you see people grabbing for information and maybe doing more radical things rather than having an open dialogue and having everyone participate and be, and feel like they had a voice in something, rather than just saying this paternalistic view, which drives me crazy. I think we're all entitled to information, and then
these are good problems to have in a way,
right,
because it also means we're moving into an era, and this is again a reality that many patients who walk into hospitals want everything to be very black and white, and doctor knows best, and they're backed up by the best of scientists, and it's all proven fact. In fact, a lot of it's just tradition. A lot of it's just guesswork. We're moving into an era now where we're actually going to know, a doctor is going to know when they prescribe something, a drug or a form of treatment or a surgery, actually what it's likely to do as an effect. And they're not going to waste time and maybe cause all kinds of side effects doing things that actually won't work.
Right, right. And instead of calling it personalized medicine, I think it's better to maybe think about it as contextual health. It's information that we have about ourselves, and we take that into account. And just even using the word medicine in health, can we avoid medicine? Can we do or take preventive measures so that we, medicine is sort of a last phase of a life where you're trying to prevent things as much as you can. So if you learn in context of what's going on and you recognize things before they get too serious, is also, I think, a direction we need to be going in.
That's a big shift, though, isn't it?
It is, but contextual is the right word for it, because it is in an aging population where people are getting multiple problems of health. You need to know not just whether that patient has a particular form of cardiac arrhythmia, but are they also diabetic? Are they also on this kind of diet or that kind of diet? And in addition to knowing your genomics, you need all of that. And contextual, I think, is exactly the right word.
Okay. I want to talk to you about peonies in a second, but if anyone wants to join in this conversation, just stick your hand in the air, and if you have any questions at any stage, and I'll come to you. But please do join in, actually, because we don't want to be just hogging all the. Anyhow, you guys know far more about all of this than I do. One of the things that you were talking about earlier, I find interesting as well, because you're talking about, again, that it's about understanding what we're doing much better. It's also about understanding traditional substances that have been around for a long time and understanding their application in a better way. And this is what brings you to the subject of peonies.
Actually, to the peony, yes. Well, the peony is a good antiarrhythmic. Did you know that? And it's been known for 2,000 years. Now, the interesting question, you see, this is a beautiful challenge for systems biology. What's in the peony? About 7 or 8 different chemicals. You can look at them in isolation. You can look at them in combination. You can work out the synergy between the peanol, the peaniflorin, and whatever you have there. And then ask the interesting question, why does it work only in combination? Now, what I said earlier on is true, I think, generally of an aging population where you have complex collections of diseases, not just one. What you need is going to be perturbation of different parts of somebody's organism to, as it were, nudge it back into health. And you're not going to do it with a single drug. You're not going to do it with a single chemical. So actually looking at some of the traditional approaches may inform the systems medicine approach very, very effectively indeed, because there's thousands of years of experience.
And that's been one of the lessons of cancer, hasn't it? In fact, combination therapies, that it's by looking at an illness in a way as something dynamic and kind of attacking it dynamically that we really are achieving much greater success rates than we used to in the past.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, actually, with cancer is a very good example, because you can take a component of one element of curry. I'm going to improve the number of sales of takeaway curry, aren't I? But one of those compounds, in combination with chemotherapy, brings down the total amount of chemotherapy you need which is very important because side effects of chemotherapy are terrible. So if you can do that with a synergistic action that brings down the level that you need, you're getting there.
And it also brings in a useful point to be made as well, because one of the other concerns, and I'd like to talk to you about this in a second, Linda, people have is in relation to the economics of all of this. Again, this is, you know, the personalised medicine that, you know, understands your whole system, and the little bracelet that reads everything and all that. That would be grand for the people who can afford it. But the other potential of this medicine is to make savings, so that we will not be giving medicine that doesn't need to be administered. And there could be huge savings there.
Yes, with some provisos, of course. We're talking about traditional approaches that have been tested clinically, in clinical trial. We know exactly what's in them from the point of view of chemistry. They've got standardized levels of dosage. You get a package which sort of is a bit like taking Beecham's powders. You know exactly what's there, and you know what it acts on. If you've got all of those in place, there's no fundamental difference between that and a mixture of chemicals that your doctor gives you because he takes one thing from Glaxo, another from Pfizer. Well, it's just the same thing in the end. But you're using, as I said, experience that's already there. And it's cheap, relatively speaking.
And that question of economics and how this is going to play into the accessibility to this new era of personalised medicine.
Yeah, and another analogy is, you know, the ketchup model, right? Back in the day, Heinz didn't care that you would squirt out half the bottle on your plate and only eat half of it. It was the same in the pharmaceutical industry. The pharma companies they weren't as concerned with the fact that a drug would only work in 40% or 50% of the people who took that drug. We have to change our economic system and the incentives for insurance companies and providers to be matching up the treatments to the patient. And the closer we get to that, the better the economics. But unfortunately, we'll probably have to spend a lot more on research to get to that point. And that's the pushback I think we're seeing right now, is that do we want to spend the money to get to that point and be able to figure out the complexities of this? And it's not going to be easy. But again, I kind of go back, though, to the message that prevention, not putting people on any medication. How many times do you go to the doctor and when they ask me how many medications I'm on and I say I'm not on any, the doctor asks me again, no, let me rephrase that. What medications are you on? It's expected nowadays, certainly in the US, that you're at least on one medication. And how can we get away from that and not having that be the knee-jerk response that you need to be on something, rather than looking at your diet and looking at your whole picture and your environment and all of these things that are playing into your health. And so that's, again, this more of a systems approach, I think, than just looking at someone who's reached a point where they need a medication.
So is it, you know, science fiction stuff to imagine that within a couple of decades we'll all be going around wearing a bracelet that will monitor what is happening in our bodies? And once a year you'd go to the doctor, hand over the bracelet, she would slot it into the machine and then say, oh yes, well, you know, your chances of having a heart attack are a bit higher this year, so we'll do this, that or the other, or you're absolutely fine, go away. So that we would know about disease even, you know, before we go saying, doctor, I feel sick.
Absolutely, yeah. We're already seeing this with, you know, the Y Things, which is a French company where you can take your blood pressure and actually tweet your blood pressure out. People are using these all the time.
What, you tweet your blood pressure?
Sure, if you want to. It goes, you know, it's this Internet of Things, right? And all of these devices now that we can wear. I've got the Basis watch, which takes my heart rate all day long, and my galvanic skin response, surface skin temperature. We're going to be overwhelmed with data, and so doctors aren't going to want to have all of this come streaming in. But if we can figure out what are the right snippets to be sharing with our physician over time, we'll look back on the day when we went in and had our blood pressure taken once in the clinic as absolutely insane. How is that a reflection of what's going on in your daily life? But rather you can show averages and show you know, computational views of data that you've collected over time is going to be far more meaningful.
So the biggest application of this is actually potentially in healthy people and preserving them in that state.
Hopefully, if we can move to that, yes, absolutely. And the minute we start to see a trend starting to take off, we can then tweak that hopefully and get it back on track through diet and through exercise and things that we all know we should be doing. But I think when we get those specific nudges that say, you're getting a little bit off track, then we'll know what to do, and then it'll be more specific to what your current condition is, and hopefully people will embrace that and we'll see behavior change.
Mm-hmm. Or will they just take off the watch and throw it at the wall?
Well, I think you're going to have to add to this. I mean, actually, I must say, just before this session, she handed me what looked like a mobile phone. I just placed my fingers on the mobile phone and there was my T-wave from my electrocardiogram coming out before me. Absolutely marvelous. No, but what I was going to say, actually the T-wave was perfectly upright, perfectly normal.
Great.
But what I was going to add is that you need also an educated public, because the insight here is not, do you see this? It's, do you understand? And I mean, just to take that example for a moment, if my T-wave had gone the wrong way, I wouldn't actually have been initially alarmed. And the reason for that is there are perfectly normal ways in which the T-wave can be inverted. Athletes know that, incidentally. In extremes of exercise, it can happen, particularly after the exercise. But what that means is you need the education to know you don't get alarmed with the first thing you see that looks, you don't throw the thing away. You start to think, and you say, that's interesting. What does that mean? And so we need to have an educated public to know how to use these.
And it's easy, and I know, we'll hear governments and insurance companies and all the rest saying, oh yes, it's just about more science education, but it's not just that. We're almost inherently programmed not to understand risk terribly well.
Exactly so.
And in fact, the data we're going to be getting from you guys, because of you guys in the future, is going to be not necessarily black and white, but percentage risk.
Absolutely so.
And no more than with weather forecasts, we just want to know is it going to rain or not.
Well, I wanted to know it today, but when I come to Dublin, I certainly want to know if it's going to rain. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you take the information from genomics alone, you might get maybe a 10 to 20% prediction of what kinds of difficulties you might have. If you add to that your lifestyle, you might get another 10 or 20%. And of course, it slowly builds up. But there's also a message of warning for the insurance companies. Don't think that because you know somebody's genome, you know what they're going to die of. That's a false way of thinking about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And in terms of insurance companies and the kind of the application of all of this in society, how well prepared are we?
Well, I think that, again, it's going to have to be a conversation and a dialogue between the companies and doctors and patients, and we all need to take ownership of our piece of it. And as we get more information about ourselves, we really have the responsibility then of taking that information and doing something with it. And if we don't, that's where it stops short. And I think incentives now are coming into play through employers. They're doing things to incentivize their employees to be healthier, and they're experimenting with a lot. I don't know if this is going on in the UK and Ireland, but certainly in the US. My husband works for a large financial services company, and he has been asked to go in for the physical and get more information up front, and then figure out what he can do throughout the year to improve, whether it's losing a little weight or eating certain foods. We don't really know what the answer is yet, but we're seeing this trend starting to happen now. But I don't think we can always call the
huge issues, though, of social control involved in all of that, that I can see a lot of people balking against and finding, very 1984-ish.
Yeah, well, we saw that in New York City. In fact, I just saw it on CNN where they had a panel of people, and the whole conversation was around obesity. And they were asking, first they asked the audience, do you think these huge, humongous sodas that we have in the US are a bad thing? And they all said, oh, absolutely. And then they asked, well, are you in favor of Mayor Bloomberg putting these things into place to get rid of the supersize me? And not a single person was in favor of that. So there'd be somewhere between these two opinions and situations, we hopefully will have an answer. But people continue to order these. I love coming to Europe when you go to McDonald's and the sodas are like this big. It's very refreshing.
And we're still talking about a sugar tax and not getting there. Anybody else want to join in at this particular stage? Walter.
How personalized do you think medicine will become, and in what time frame? How close are we to personalized?
I think we're a long ways away, unfortunately. And so, just to put it out there about 23andMe, the whole reason that the idea sort of came to me for that company was seeing how removed patients were from the process and how hard it was going to be to get to personalized medicine. I'd gone to the personalized medicine conference at Harvard, I think 4 years running, and it was the same conversation every year. A little bit changed, a little tweaked, but pretty much the same. And the company I was working for at the time, Perligen Sciences, we had access to the full Affymetrix gene chip technology, but we couldn't find enough patient cohorts to work with, and we were always running up short. And And then the budgeting and the funding was never there for the large-scale studies. And so we just kept seeing the NIH funding study after study where it was underpowered statistically, and it just seemed crazy. Why are we continuing to do this same mistake over and over again? And so 23andMe was really not about, we're here to tell you everything about genetics. We knew that wasn't true. It was more, how can we create a whole new research model? So I think we're going to see more and more of this where patients are more directly involved and hopefully be more willing to share their data than we've seen in the silos in universities and academic centers, and see a movement that enables large-scale study.
And what was the experience of those patients who engaged with, or volunteers who engaged with it?
With
23andMe?
Well,
compared to traditional models?
Well, we've been really surprised at how many people are willing to participate in the research side of it, which is filling out the surveys and layering on additional information. Genetics was just the basis, and then we have continual surveys. I don't know if you've been, or you're a participant yourself, but we're always very thrilled to see how many people, if they fill out one survey, they tend to fill out all of them, and there are a lot of surveys there. So it's just a new way of staying engaged with people, and as we put out additional information, we get more feedback, and it's the most exciting thing to me was starting to see the p-values from these studies changing over time. So, you know, as more people come into the database and more people answer the surveys, we start to see these things fluctuating, which is fascinating.
It means a lot in terms of the accuracy of your data.
Yes, exactly.
And personalised medicine, how personalised do you think it can get, Denis?
I think it's a process. I don't see it as being a sudden switch from what we're doing now to personalised medicine just like that. It will be a process in which we slowly get better and better at doing it, at knowing how to integrate the information. And what I like very much about what you were saying, Linda, is the fact that it isn't just this or that. You need to bring all of it together. And that's going to take time because it's a huge amount of data, first of all. You're looking for correlations, sometimes correlations that are quite small in terms of predictability from this bit of information being quite... It's when you add it all together that you can begin to make sense of it. But we're not going to do that quickly. It's going to take time in exactly the way you describe. You begin to see the correlations coming out better and better as you go along, as you gather much more information.
And across populations too, you know, that's the other issue.
Exactly.
Is that we tend to have much more of a research going on in certain populations, which leave a lot of people out. So that's the other hope, is that we'll be able to broaden this out to across the world and include many more ethnicities and people of different, from different walks of life as well.
But in terms of the capability of people to engage with the information that they're getting and to be able to apply its benefits to their own lives, you're really talking about probably a well-heeled and well-educated section of society, aren't you, at this stage?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see this all the time, but with time, hopefully what we learn, the good thing about DNA is that it doesn't know whether it's living in a rich person's body or a poor person's body. It's there, and you know, we can learn a lot, and I think that the more people who are willing to help fund this through their own participation, eventually it will start to trickle around. I don't want to say trickle down, that's bad. Reagan taught us that was not the right way to phrase that. But again, I think society in general will benefit as more people participate.
And are the implications different, do you think, Denis? And I mean, Britain has the NHS, so in a publicly funded health system, is it the same problem or are there different problems?
It's the same kind of problem, but with a national health service, of course, you have the huge challenge of whether you can integrate all the information together in a way that enables you to access it all. Because
are there computers that can manage all of this data?
Oh, if we get onto the question of making software work and making systems of software work, we all know the problems. And
that's definitely translational.
People are trying to deal and cope with exactly that kind of difficulty within the National Health Service at the moment. So it is an issue, and a big one. That's right. But you have to try to do it because it doesn't make sense to ignore the information that's out there. It doesn't make sense to ignore how you would integrate it together. So you have to do it. It seems to me to be the only way forward. It's a necessary way forward, but we shouldn't minimize the difficulties there will be. The ethical ones that we referred to earlier on, and the difficulties in terms of ensuring that this dream that at the click of a button you can find everything out about Mary Smith and what her problems are, that dream is a long way off, of course, but it's the direction in which we're going.
And there are solutions we still haven't imagined as well. And one of the things I found interesting when you and Walter were talking beforehand as well, you work in the area of the heart here. An awful lot of the research that's going on is in the area of cancer and developing better personalised cancer therapies and an understanding of how to do so. It's by focusing and focusing and focusing.
Oh,
but along
absolutely.
that, lessons will be learned that will then unlock many other doors in other kinds of diseases.
Yes, focus is the key, because you see, if you just calculate what would be possible as interactions between what sort of number of genes can we talk about now? The least 25,000. They're just the protein coding ones. There are many more that we think are there now in the non-protein coding area. But you know, the interaction between 25,000 components is greater than the total number of molecules in the whole universe. The number is absolutely gigantic. If you do not focus down on a systems analysis to particular questions, you're not going to get there. And I think if my group and the kind of work that I've been doing over the years has had any success, it's been through focusing on very specific questions. And although the research we do is very fundamental, the focus is often on, can we deal with a particular drug produced by, I won't name companies at the moment, but anyway, by a particular company, and help them to get around a major problem like cardiac arrhythmia, a side effect. So I think focus is going to be the key. Otherwise it's too big, it's too vast, there's too much you could do, but if you focus down on specific questions, it can get there. And the evidence shows that you can get there too.
What are you proudest of in your work so far?
Well, I think one of the best examples from the point of view of being proud is that there's a drug out there called ivabradine now that treats patients that deal with the problems of a heart attack, of an ischemic episode in the heart. That is, you know, when you feel you're going to collapse. Not very good, very dangerous, in fact. And a lot of patients are being saved already. Now that arose because about 30 odd years ago, a colleague and in my laboratory was working on a particular protein in the heart that has a particular function in the rhythm generation of the heart. Later on, a pharmaceutical company realized that if you target that protein, you could produce a safe cardiac slower. Why safe? Because the system's biological analysis showed that even if you inhibited that completely, it wouldn't stop the heart. Now, slowing the heart stops it from demanding too much energy, which stops an ischemic episode. You can see the direction in which I'm going. What I'm proud of in that is that a systems analysis led to a pharmaceutical company seeing the opportunity and then taking the opportunity, running with it, and producing 25 years later, a new medication which is out there and being used, and you're saving lives.
And do you think the territory we're in now, Linda, means that that kind of time frame can be shortened dramatically in the future?
Hopefully, yes. That would be the ideal outcome, with having people more involved directly.
The point of places like this.
Yes, exactly. But I think that bringing patients closer to the problem and including them more in the research process, I think will speed things up, or at least that we'll see. We'll experiment with that. But that is that's the dream, and that's what we're hearing. It's a drumbeat from patient communities. And I was just at a conference in New York City called Partnering for Cures, put on by Michael Milken and the Faster Cures organization. And every foundation now, every disease foundation, is trying to bring patients into the research process. And we'll have to see if this really does change the game, but we do believe that it will speed things up.
Because it's amazing. I mean, the first thing people do when they get sick now is go online and Google.
Yes.
So they may as well be getting access to good information and good data as opposed to whatever, hocus pocus is out there.
Yes, and what everyone points to is what happened with AIDS and the activism that was involved and how much patients really influenced. And that's sort of the dream, is that, how can we replicate that and have that passion and have the, refuse to take, to be with a hand in the face to say, okay, we'll take care of it. We'll take it from here. Patients said, no way. We have to keep pushing and driving for, and talk about, cocktail medicines. And, they just kept experimenting over and over and over again until they got to something it's always evolving. And that's the thing that we can't ever think we're done. We have to continue to push, and that's I think that has set a very good example for other disease groups now that they want to replicate.
And that was, the AIDS example fed into the development of Herceptin, one of the early targeted medicines in the States, and even within cancer as a disease. Very often breast cancer patients are regarded as, if you like, to the forefront because there's been a tradition of activism within that kind of cancer, and that's something that hasn't happened maybe in other diseases where traditionally the prognosis has been much worse, but it's something that's beginning to change. Absolutely. So that to be activist in a way, patients need some kind of hope, don't they?
Yes, they do, yeah. And having an example like that has been very, I think, enlightening for both sides, for the research side and for the patient side, and to be able to really put that passion into an organization that previously had been, like a foundation. They might raise money and then they just hand it off to institutions to conduct the research, and then maybe a paper comes out of it. And even publications of papers, they end up in something that's not even accessible to a patient. And so Mike Eisen is on the advisory board at 23andMe, and he started PLOS, the Public Library of Science. And that's another movement that we're seeing where let's put these papers and these publications in a place that patients have access to them as well. And one of the things we were pushing for, which we haven't really seen yet, is to write an abstract that actually a layperson could understand, and kind of require that as part of a publication, so that this is now accessible to everyone, including people who don't have a PhD.
And it's really important, isn't it, as well, in terms of getting, if a person is to understand a health message, to understand the data that the doctor will get off that, they need to be able to understand what scientists are saying. And that's one of the experiences somebody can have. Say, for instance, sorry to keep harking back to cancer, but because it's such a complicated disease, and because in fact they know so much about it, so you're learning about all, whoever, most of us never heard of pathways before we developed a disease like this, and suddenly you get to realize pathways, resistance, yada yada, the interaction, and that it is necessarily that complicated. What we need is to move towards a situation where people are coming in with that kind of understanding, at least generally, in their heads, isn't that right? For all of this to work and make sense.
What would help that? You mentioned earlier on lay summaries, lay abstracts. Many grant bodies, of course, require you to do that now. If I apply to the Heart Foundation in the United Kingdom, I have to provide a lay abstract. I think that journals should start doing that more. Some do already, because patients do go to the internet to look for the action of this compound, and what they find is a lot of gibberish, of course. A lay summary does two things. First of all, it gets the patient into the picture and see and understand better, particularly an educated patient. But second, it's a very good exercise for the scientist, his or her himself, to be asked to state in reasonably simple language what they've shown. And you'll be surprised just how difficult that is. Writing that 100-word abstract for the layperson is vastly more difficult than writing the whole paper.
Yeah. Because you have to understand something completely to know what to leave out. And that's a very difficult thing to do indeed.
Yeah.
I see we're joined by the Minister who'll be coming up and speaking shortly. How are you, Sean? How are you? So we'll move this towards a conclusion then. What's the next biggest challenge you hope to complete in your lifetime?
Personally?
Yes.
At the moment, I think that the way forward is going to be to understand multiple action compounds. And after all, most compounds produced by the pharmaceutical industry are multiple action. They all have what we call side effects. I don't regard them necessarily as side effects. Sometimes they may be bad, but sometimes they may be synergistic. It's going to be understanding that, and that's what I'm focused on at the moment. How can you understand that this compound is best for this kind of patient because of the 2 or 3 actions it has, not the 1 action? That's a systems biological question, because you have to understand the interactions. as a consequence of perturbing the system in several places at once. That's going to keep me busy for the next 50 years.
I was just going to say, yeah, you like simple challenges, don't you? That makes building a model of the human heart just simple. And Linda, Curious Labs, what are you most curious about? What are the questions you hope to answer in the medium term?
Well, it's more that we hope to build a platform that allows people to ask questions and find other people who share their questions, and then give them the tools to hopefully answer the questions through exploring their own data and giving them a place to bring all of that crazy data that's in us, around us, and on us into one place and play with it, explore it, and share it with others. And one of the things that I'd love to see in my lifetime, or sooner than that, is that a health company owns viral. So we see Facebook and Twitter and all these companies that go viral. Well, we should own viral in the health space, I think. It fits us very well. And I want to see a network, a global network of people who are all interconnected and working together towards solutions, and really own this idea of virality on the web and use it for a really positive outcome, which is to understand the human condition.
And you're not afraid of it at all. You're excited by it, aren't you?
I love it, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us today. Thank you too also, Denis. It's been my pleasure. I hope it's been yours. Hugh, I'll hand over to you now.